Hi, everyone. Today, I had the honor and privilege of speaking to Dr. Philipp Schott. He is a retired veterinarian from Winnipeg, Canada, but he wrote this best-selling book called The Accidental Veterinarian. That was his first book. But I just read his new book, Healing the Beasts, a jaunt through curious history of the veterinary arts. Oh my God, it was so much fun to read about how animals and the human-animal bond was prevalent even in the 800s, the 700s, because animals were as important to people's survival as air and water. Let's hear what Philip and I talk about now. Hi, I'm Deborah Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict. Hi, everyone. Deborah Hamilton back here again. Remember to like and give us 5 stars and share the podcast so that other people can hear these wonderful Why Do Pets Matter podcasts. Today, I am so thrilled to have Dr. Philipp Schott here. He is a veterinarian, retired now, from Winnipeg, Canada. I have him here both to, of course, answer our one question, why do pets matter to you, Philip? And also to talk about his latest book, Heal the Beasts, a jaunt through the curious history of the veterinary arts. I just loved it. And once I read it, I said, I have to have this gentleman on my podcast because, as I found out later, he has 7 more books that I'm going to have to read because this one was so great. I think the rest of them are going to be wonderful. 3 are mysteries, 3 are vet-related, and one is about his dad. So I think I'll start with his dad because I always love to read about families. Philip, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I am thrilled. I can't wait for this because I've been so excited. We always start with that question, why do pets matter? So Philip, why do pets matter to you?
Pets matter to me because they allow me to have a natural, non-judging, non-verbal relationship with another being. It's something that's, I think, inherent in being human to have that connection. And I live in a city, so it brings that kind of connection that perhaps our ancestors grew up with and just took for granted. Pets bring that kind of connection to me, and we communicate without speaking. Well, I speak to him, but I don't know how much. I'm talking about my dog and my cat, both of them, how much he understands. A little bit, obviously, but mostly it's that very natural nonverbal communication, just that presence, and that's plugs me into my natural being.
Well, I love that because I think that our natural beings and our souls are fed by the time we spend with our pets. I just had my son's cat here and I'd never had a cat before. Boy, does that really lower your blood pressure or what?
It does, yeah. Well, it depends a little bit. Yes, when my cat was a kitten, I'm sure my blood pressure was lower than when it was destroying things and knocking things off counters and so forth. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jane is 7, so I guess maybe she was a little well behaved, sort of. But she used to cut me off of Zooms all the time. She'd walk across the
right. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I love the fact that you wrote this book, which went through the history of veterinary medicine from really the beginning. And I'd love for you to share with us why it was that you decided that this book had to be written, because it seems to me it was very important to you.
Yeah. So a couple of reasons. I mean, the big one for me is that, hey, my first book is entitled The Accidental Veterinarian, because unlike most of my colleagues, I didn't want to be a veteran since I was 4 or anything like that. I kind of stumbled into it. Didn't have pets growing up, not until much later. So my interests were diverse. I interested certainly in animals and biology, but I also had an interest in history. And I was told at the time, this is the early 1980s, oh, there's no future in history. That's a funny statement. There's no career there for you. Get a profession. And so stumbled into kind of through biology, through the back door, then into veterinary medicine, which has been wonderful. Just a fantastic 35 years I spent doing that. But in the back of my mind, I was always, but I love history, reading it, in my spare time. Can I merge these things? So when I became a published author, I realized maybe I can, because second item, no book on the market, not even out of print, written on the history of veterinary medicine for the general public. There's a couple of academic works, even those are out of print. There's just nothing out there. So I thought, this is made for me. I can indulge my passion in history, indulge my passion in animals, in veterinary medicine, merge the two. So that's where it came about.
I love this because it seems to me it was like a heart book you had to do.
Yes, absolutely. It's been kind of cooking in the back of my mind for a number of years now, just waiting for the opportunity.
So there are several important stories that you tell. Which was your favorite?
I love that question. It's the favorite child question, right? Because I'm kind of a quirky dude. I love the quirky stories. There's some weird stuff that went on in veterinary medicine, and that's part of I aim to entertain as well as educate without getting too flippant or light about it either. I mean, some of the stuff is quite serious, of course. So my favorite is probably the story of Dark Ages England. So it's technically, we call it the early medieval period now. We're not supposed to call it the Dark Ages anymore, but it's after the Romans left, before the Normans came. So around the year 800 or so, peasants had improved plows, and they're plowing a little deeper, and they were finding little stone arrowheads. And they had no sense as to the past. Like, they knew the Romans had been there, but beyond that, they didn't know anything about Paleolithic people. So the explanation they jumped to was elves. There must be invisible elves shooting arrows. Of course, that's what you would think if you found arrowheads. Elves, right?
In Ireland.
So the veterinary angle is that they then blame the ills of their livestock, their horses and their cattle, on the invisible elves. So there's a book written at that time called Bald's Leech Book. Bald being the guy that wrote it. Leech Book, book for leeches. Leeches were the term they used for doctors as well as veterinarians. The horse leech, the cow leech, the dog leech. It wasn't a pejorative. It was just the description of something these people did.
Was that because they used leeches?
They used leeches, absolutely. So it's as if I were called a dog stethoscope. They're just describing the profession by its most prominent tool, the tool that seemed most mysterious to the outsider. So Bald's Leech Book then describes elfshot cattle and horses. And so the dog, in this case, the story I describe is a horse leech then comes to this farm. They look at this bloated horse, and yep, it was the elves, the invisible elves. They were shooting these arrows at your horse. So it goes through this whole elaborate ritual to cure the horse of being elfshot. This worked in some cases, probably, I'm guessing, I don't have any documentary evidence, but I think these guys probably had some practical knowledge too. They probably would say, oh, and by the way, maybe take the horse off the fresh grass, what one actually does for bloat, right? Or to prevent it. Moreover, they were itinerant. This is well before the internet, so you couldn't hunt these guys down if they were wrong. So when they were wrong, they'd just disappear and be in the next village, and you wouldn't know, right? Or you would blame it on other factors. The ritual wasn't done quite right or whatever.
You'll never see them again, so I can tell.
Never see them again. So that's the quirky story of horses and cattle being elf-shot in the early Middle Ages in Britain.
I love that. I love that. And it seems to me that you also sort of discussed a little in the book how the human-animal bond has been tantamount, but in different ways throughout history. They weren't anything more than, but really they were more than, because, more than pack animals or things like that. There were some feelings of responsibility because they needed them for their livelihood, or they needed them for their sustenance.
Yeah, and I think that we're, in some ways, one of the themes of the book is that we're kind of coming full circle. We tend to think that animals have mostly been viewed for those practical reasons. We would want to heal the beast, so to speak, treat ill animals because they are of economic value to us. They provide muscle power, they provide meat, useful in wartime, like horses, for example. But emotional bonds were always there. They maybe disappeared didn't disappear, were not as prominent during the early part of the Industrial Revolution through to the early 20th century. But if you go far enough back, it was quite prominent. So the very first story is from 12,000 BC. So it's amazing what archaeologists can do. They found this skeleton of a couple and a puppy buried together, and it wasn't just an accidental jumble of bones. This was a ritual burial. They were put together on purpose. The cool thing is that we know from the puppy's teeth, from the discoloration of the enamel, that the puppy had distemper. Now, let me tell you, in the year 2025, distemper is still a really tough disease. We lose lots of puppies. Here in Manitoba, we've got northern communities, fly-in communities, disadvantaged communities where vaccination isn't very widespread, and lots of puppies still die of distemper. Obviously, no vaccines in 12,000 BC, right? So the fact that this puppy lived with distemper, and we know that it lived with distemper for a little while, indicates it had some sort of care. So that's the first thing. This is our first evidence of veterinary care. Something was done to keep this dog alive.
Extraordinary care was given to this puppy so that it could survive. I think it was, what was it, 6 months, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, quite a while, and it was a pretty long time with distemper.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that at that time, primarily people were buried with grave goods that would be useful in the afterlife. So an axe or a sword or whatever. There is no way that a sick puppy is useful in the afterlife. So clearly there was some sort of an emotional bond there. And you also think back to those medieval peasants. They, if your cow was your life, so you really depended on this cow and you lived with it in the same hut. Typically, they didn't have separate barns. There's no way you couldn't develop an emotional bond with that animal, right? That's just natural.
And although it might not be defined with, clothes and strollers as we have,
yeah, probably not.
was just as important to both the animal's life and the human's life because they both knew they depended on each other.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're coming back to that to more and more.
What are your thoughts on that? Because now, anecdotally, in say the 50s and 60s, when you and I were young, everybody knew that pets made us feel better. If you pet them or whatever, but there was no double peer-reviewed study on the fact that your heart rate dropped and your brain activity changed and whatever pheromones, blah blah blah. There was no peer-reviewed study. Now, I believe also in Canada, but I know in the United States we have sort of PhD peer-reviewed research on how animals affect our lives. That was clearly set up in your book through history, but I don't know that the human-animal bond has necessarily been attributed to back then as you just did, and I'm wondering what you feel for it right now.
Yeah, it's I've certainly in my time in practice, so 35 years, just one little anecdote that maybe is illustrative. So in the early 1990s, if somebody referred to themselves as the dog's mom or dad, it was with an ironic wink, it was with a tone of voice, a little, haha.
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. 50% of people, more than 50, I don't have that statistic there, but a very large number of clients fully unironic. Now, they understand there isn't a biological connection. They understand they did not give birth to this dog. Yes, speaks to the power of that bond that this sort of language is normalized. And I think there's a tendency to view this as some sort of a weird outgrowth of late Western capitalism, that we've just all become spoiled and we're spoiling ourselves and spoiling our pets. There may be some aspect, okay, like you say, the dog's dressed up in clothes and put in strollers, or something perhaps a little odd going on there. But no judgment for my part.
No judgment on my part either. If I wanted to take it, I put it in a stroller too. He's an Irish.
But in a broader historical context, I don't think that's that out of line. Okay, not the stroller thing, but generally that's close connection. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that, throughout human history and throughout all cultures, it's not just a Western thing. So we see these connections, you take from the Inuit with their sled dogs through to the Australian Aborigines and people living in the Amazon basin, or the San people who I visited in Namibia a number of years ago, and their connection with their dogs. Yeah, it's practical because it's survival in a lot of cases, but there's also an emotional and dare I say spiritual connection in a lot of cases. That's just normal. That is the natural human state. has been for 12 to 14,000 years at least.
I have to agree with you because, when we think about our pets now, and the reason it's become such an important study and such an important discussion is because the ability for us to spread information so quickly now created the ability for everyone to say, oh my God, you feel that way about your dog too?
Right.
The
It
neighborhood.
doesn't feel so weird anymore.
It's not weird anymore. And the desire to recognize animals as sentient beings and being able to take care of them has become both, I think, acknowledgement of their capabilities of doing things and also can sometimes create conflict. I always say I love Sean Heinrich. He tries to show how stingrays are beautiful in the water and how sharks are beautiful in the water to the people who are harvesting them so that maybe the children will think about, say, ecotourism instead of harvesting, trying to shift that paradigm. And I think in the book, that's something that the shifting paradigms from every century, so to speak, was what made animals come into different favor off and on. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think that if we gently create the ability to understand how important animals are in our lives, we can make the animals important in our lives.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to the risk of offending anybody in farm country who's listening, but in modern industrial agriculture, like modern industrial animal agriculture, is an aberration. The natural state of being with animals is to honor and respect them. Even if you're going to slaughter them and eat them, that's fine. But you look at indigenous people and look at our peasant ancestors. I mean, I'm German, right? So if I look back a few generations ago, people were much more respectful within the confines of their circumstances and their property and so forth. Of course, what we see now is, as I said, it's an aberration. It's an unusual moment in history that hopefully we can somehow resolve, because it's not
Hopefully, yeah, because
damaging to our souls to be doing this.
and because we have all this science now, we find, I mean, Temple Grandin has been beating the drum for years about how, slaughtering may not go away, but you can do it in a way that is less cortisol producing, which then stays in the meat, which then what you eat. And so there's so many things that science now is showing that in your book you were clear to say these animals went along with them. They were part of their lives. And so although probably the slaughtering wasn't as sanitary then as it may be now, but maybe not, it didn't create the agita, so to speak, on the pet. On the animal, it really for me it's just really important to recognize that we all have to think about these things. I, at the risk of offending anyone who's either a vegan, vegetarian, meat eater, fish eater, pescatarian, I just think that we need to be a little more aware. And as you said, most of the people who were in veterinary medicine or who were taking care of animals throughout the ages, the animals were really important to the people, and they knew them.
Mm-hmm. Them as individuals. Yeah.
So it was wholly different. So now, I said you were retired. What are you thinking about doing next? Because you were a veterinarian for 35 years. Huge kudos for staying in such a wonderful position. I'm sure you have many stories about clients who are wonderful and clients who, pricked your last nerve. But I think that's like
Mostly wonderful. It's the thing that most veterinarians are introverts. It just really attracts that sort of person. So people come, I always tell the veterinary students that we have come through the practice, this is not an animal business that happens to involve people. It's actually a people business that happens to involve animals. And if you don't become comfortable with people, you become really unhappy really quickly, really stressed, burnt out, get into all kinds of difficulties. So I learned that lesson pretty fast and learned to find the clients, even the angry ones, you just find, and they're upset ones, the sad ones. There's always there's some humanity behind there. People are coming from somewhere, some place of hurt or place of misunderstanding. So, and then a lot of it's just funny too. Are funny. People are interesting and amusing when you pay attention. So that was all. The people part of it was actually quite wonderful. The animals, that's a given. That's wonderful if you're in this profession. But the people part, that was a surprise. I'm sad to leave that. But apparently, I'm not going to live to be 200. So I'm going to make good use of my remaining time, because I do want to do want to write more. So that's was always a passion in the background. Now the opportunity. So there are some more book projects in the pipeline.
I'm sure there are more anecdotal stories you'll be telling us. But before we came on the podcast, you said something that, of course, pricked my interest. You said you have to do a lot more listening. And in veterinary medicine, the art of listening for diagnosis is one thing, but the art of listening for, as you said, where the person is, how they're feeling, what they're suffering is, I think, equally as important for a veterinarian to do, although they may not have time in this rushed world, to finding a diagnosis as well as just listening about what the pet is going through.
Oh, absolutely. It's only through building relationships with the people that you can actually treat the pet. I mean, that's your intent is obviously to heal the pet, to make it better or prevent disease in it. But you only have access to that if you gain the client's trust. And you can only gain the client's trust if you listen to them. And it's interesting. I'm sure you've seen these. I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it's something like these hidden cameras, things they do inside exam rooms. The average veterinarian interrupts their client 7 seconds after the client starts talking, something like that, 7 or 17, some incredibly short amount of time. And when they train veterinarians to listen properly, people fear, oh man, now my appointments are going to go on for hours. They don't. It adds like a minute or two to the average appointment length. It hardly adds anything at all. So it's there's all these kind of bad habits that veterinarians develop. I don't think we're trained properly in veterinary school because we've got those 4 years to get crammed full of microbiology and pathology and anatomy and physiology and cardiology and all the ologies, right?
Right.
But there isn't time for the, I guess, peopleology. I'm not sure. Psychology, I guess that's it. That's the word I'm looking for. So there's no time is spent on that. You learn it or you don't, I guess,
or you have it innately or you don't.
I suppose, yeah. And they're not screened for that. Like veterinary students it's so competitive to get into vet school. And for a variety of legal reasons, I don't know how it is in the US, but here primarily has to be a lot of emphasis on marks because that's an allegedly objective measure.
Yeah.
So there's no subjectivity on the part of the interview committee to bring the vet students in. People that are really driven to get really high marks, sometimes they're going to sweeping generalization or sometimes don't have the best people skills, right?
So what I think I'm hearing you say is that sometimes the ability to be people focused in medicine can actually make it less tedious and less frustrating.
Oh yeah, no, it's the secret sauce. That's the magic. It is a incredibly stressful, inherently stressful line of work, right? You're dealing with all kinds of limitations. You gotta always have a hand tied behind your back, because the patient doesn't talk, for starters, like the big cliche central fact of veterinary medicine. There's always, very rarely are there not limitations in terms of the technology that you can apply and the amount of money that you can spend and so forth. There's always some kinds of checks and balances there, all kinds of stressful. So one of the ways, the primary way, at least for me and everybody I've observed, to deal with that is to make those human connections and to really, because the pets don't really give you feedback, right? Not really, not the kind that you want most of the time anyway. It's the feedback comes to the clients and positive reinforcement. That's what works in life. That's how you train people. So you set yourself up so the clients will positively reinforce you. Then you'll start to feel good about what you're doing.
I will share with you. I've shared it on a few of the podcasts where I introduce myself as Deborah Hamilton. I'm an attorney and a breeder of Irish setters and long-haired dachshunds. And I said, how many of you think I'm your worst nightmare? And they all raised. And I said, you don't even know me. So I often speak to veterinarians about the bias they need to know they have before they walk in the room.
Yeah, it's a classic. I learned early on, my mentor, when I graduated, he said, okay, have a look in the parking lot, Philip, and look at the cars and then make a
assessment of who's in here.
Exactly. So the guy with the Porsche, he is nickeling and diming you for and how much does that cost and what's that? And the person that came by the bus, whatever it takes, doc.
Yeah. I'll find a way to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And paying for it has really become, I don't know as carefully as I should, the ability for people to, I don't know if Care Credit is in Canada.
It is, yeah.
But also there are other payment plans like vet billing and Terry and a few others that enable people to find a way. Some of the difficulties I find in veterinary medicine is that the finances not as transparent as they might be to give client. I mean, in an emergency, you can't really be transparent because it is what it is, but on a yearly or every 6-month basis, being able to talk to clients about how can we make this more palatable for you isn't a discussion that veterinarians like to have. They might have their vet manager do it, they might have the front desk, but they don't do it themselves. And I think that sort of interrupts that know, like, and trust with your veterinarian.
No, we're not trained in people, we're not trained in finances, and most of us feel very uncomfortable talking about money. So as you say, you pop it up on the manager, or you find some excuse not to talk about it. But we're actually in Manitoba, in my province, we're required by legislation to provide estimates on an ongoing basis. Yeah, it's hit and miss in terms of how it actually occurs in practice, but yeah, it's the money bit is tough. I mean, they say in the UK and in Sweden, where pet insurance has a higher penetration, that can be part of the answer. I haven't been super happy with pet insurance here, so I don't know. Maybe that's still. I assume it's still evolving, and we'll get better, and that'll be part of the puzzle in the long run.
I hope so too, because again, it's for people who can pay. When the puppies are young and they're less likely to get sick, unless God forbid they get distemper, or God forbid get hit by a car or something. It's when they're older, and then you're paying almost. I think when my dog was 10 or 11, I was paying $3,000 a year just to make sure that I didn't have to pay $3,000 for some malady. And I looked at myself and said, well, this doesn't really make any sense. And maybe it was $10,000, and so $3,000 would look great. I just, I'm wondering if there's a way in which there can be different payment methods, like vet billing, where you pay in installments, or annuities that you can set up when the puppy's young, which is great because then it goes to every dog, not just to that dog, right? Because insurance is just for that dog.
We discussed this earlier before you started recording, that I think, and I'm not sure what needs to be done in veterinary education to make this happen, but I think it's important to give people options. They're very frequently veterinarians, not to slag my colleagues, but they just present, this is it. This is what you need to do for your pet. And with the implication that if you don't, that you're an inferior pet owner, or you don't care enough, or something like that. Whereas many conditions, not all, many conditions, there are options. There's something you can do that's cheaper. It's not as good, but you're an adult. You can make that decision. You can decide, okay, I know the pros and cons of Plan A, which is $1,000. I know the pros and cons of Plan B, which is $500. I know the pros and cons of Plan C, which is $200. And you can allow the client, give them all the information. It takes a little bit of time, but it's worth it to trust their ability as an adult to make that judgment then if you present it that way.
Make that judgment, recognize that they're doing the best they can. Whether you believe they're being cheap or whatever, it's that's your belief, and get a hold of yourself, because they're doing the best they can. And I know that a lot of veterinarians say, well, if I don't offer the gold standard, then they'll tell me I didn't do the best I could have done. And I'm like, you gave them a choice, they made a choice. It's not like, well, I think you should do this one. No, these are the choices, and I will support you in whatever you want to do. And that's the conversation you have to have, that trust. Is it necessarily as prevalent as when I believe you and I both started our practices? And I've had dogs since I was 12, but that trust that the veterinarian's going to do what's best for the dog, and have a conversation about the options that they could do that would feel good to the client. And I think the piece that isn't necessarily always understood. And it may be some of my colleagues coming in and talking about malpractice and everything else that scare the dickens out of the veterinarian. So they say, well, I have to say this because I don't want them to say I didn't offer that. It's not as if you don't offer it. Absolutely. And when someone chooses the $200 one, because that's what they can do this month, because they have the rent and they have school tuition maybe, and they have car payments and they have other things, they may only be able to eke out $200. For me, and I will say this with all love and affection to everyone, taking on debt is scary.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Guilt is a powerful motivator, but it's not a very nice motivator. It's not a friendly, kind thing to do to somebody. And there's blowback in the long run. It may work one time, short term, but it's not a way to build a relationship. it's not a way to help the pet in the long run. You got to work with people. It does takes a little time, but not maybe as much as you think.
Not really, like you said, most times if you let a client ramble, it'll be for about a minute. It seems like an hour. It's sort of like when you ask a question. Do you remember asking a question, Philip, and then there was silence?
Yeah.
And the hardest thing to do is just to wait for them to answer. And yet giving them time to think about your question and answer it is key. And most of the time, especially if the animal is sick, you're not seeing that client on their best day. If they're coming in for a wellness, I remember going in with my dachshund who was perfectly fine. He just wasn't eating. And if a dachshund doesn't eat, the adage in the dachshund world is they're dying if they don't eat because the dachshund will eat no matter what.
Yeah.
So he wasn't eating, and I said, "Well, I probably should just take him in." And she took a snap of his chest, and he had terrible lung cancer. It was like everywhere.
Oh,
you wouldn't have known. He was perfectly fine yesterday, and today he didn't eat. And so she said to me, "I am so sorry, and this is what we can do." And I said, I'm going to give him every day he possibly can, and then I'm going to let him go. And that's my choice. And she said, I will support whatever you want to do because he's been a great dog. He's 10 years old. Could he live to be 12 if we did this or that? Or we don't know. So what feels comfortable to you? And I think that's what I think a veterinarian. Mine was 25 years with me, and you've probably had clients who are 25 years with you, and you had this shorthand as well. You knew they were going to do what was best for the dog. I think
trust is a two-way street for sure.
I think sometimes they feel they need to do things because otherwise they're a bad pet parent. And I love to tell veterinarians, let them make their choice and support their choice. They are going to make it. They're going to do what they need to do and listen to them. Back on the breeder for 1 minute, it was funny. I taught a bunch of veterinarians at a clinic up in New York. When we talk breeders, they go, oh my God, they come in with this whole packet of stuff. And the breeder says this and that. Now I keep saying, what are you kidding me? You have to give them their vaccinations, whatever. I said, I hear you. They really frost you when they tell you what they should be doing for their dog when you're the vet and they're just the pet owner or they're the breeder. And they go, yeah, I just, I really want to know why breeders think they can tell me what to do. And I said, well, can I share something with you as a breeder? And they go, yeah, okay. And I go, we don't know anything about anything other than this line. Irish setters, golden retrievers, long-haired dachshunds, English cockers. We don't know anything about any other line of English cocker. We don't know but we know about these guys. And the last 3 times we gave this vaccination, we had a reaction, HOD, a panosteitis, whatever we had. So we want to spread it out. We want to split them, but it's going to cost extra if you have to come back and split them. And we don't give split shots. And so, you sit there and you just say, well, I get it, but then we're going to have to really be careful about watching the dog. And that's the kind of conversation that probably you would appreciate because now you know that this puppy may actually have a reaction to this shot.
Risk, sure.
They may not. I have a friend who bought a pug and the breeder told her, don't give her rabies before she's a year. And the vet said, this woman is crazy. And so she'll go into anaphylactic shock. And so the vet said she was crazy, gave her the shot. And of course, the dog went into anaphylactic shock.
That's unfortunate. All right. Yeah. Veterinarians, particularly, I'm going to say younger, a little bit, and this is doctors and dentists and all professionals, a little bit fragile, because they really need to feel they need to project ironclad confidence, 100.0%. You will trust me because I am always right. When in actuality, in the long run, trust is built more with people that show a little bit of vulnerability and a little bit of, I'm not too sure about this. I'm going to check with a colleague, or, hey, you heard that from from your brother-in-law who's a vet or from your breeder. Let me look into that because that's interesting, as opposed to, no, I've got the answers, because that's not a way to build trust.
So you've been in a few of my classes then, Philip, because I always say if they bring this whole entire litany and they say, we're not supposed to do this, I said, tell them, I'd like to read that. And can we reschedule this appointment? Unfortunately, it'll cost you another $100 because we can't finish today, but I'd like to read what your breeder said. And then I said to them, do you ever think about calling the breeder? Oh my God, be still my heart. Don't ever call the breeder. They're crazy. And I go, most breeders are not crazy and they would appreciate speaking to the vet about what it is. I know when I sent a dog, I think, to Louisiana, and the vet called me because I had some crazy stuff that didn't want to do. And the vet said, but here we have this and this and this, and that's why I recommend this and this. Oh, lepto. I hated lepto. Please don't give it to them till they're a year. And the vet called me and said, we have a huge outbreak of lepto here. I think I would be doing you and your puppy and your owner disservice not calling you and telling you that. And I said, thank you so much. And yes, let's spread it out. Let's not give it all in one visit. I said, I'd rather, my client, my owner pay an extra visit, and they'll be okay with that too, because they'll know that they're covering their pet. You and I are working together as a team, and the pet is going, the puppy is going to thrive. They're not going to get leptospirosis. And so this is the kind of thing that I think is missed sometimes when you have to be right.
Right, all the time. Yeah, no.
So lawyers are like that too. So
yeah, and it's stressful too to keep that barrier up and
we don't know everything, and it's often so much better to just take a minute, take a breath, and say, that's really interesting. Would you mind if I did a little research on that, and let's get together again? That ability to recognize you can take a break, and maybe the client, especially if it's a wellness visit, right, or it's the first puppy visit, because it takes the stress off of you to have to follow something in your heart you don't believe in, because you're the veterinarian living in that area, knowing what the risks are, but also creates that, or doesn't create that us versus them kind of discussion between, and there's the puppy owner, right, with the beautiful puppy they just bought. My vet says this, but my breeder says that. And then the puppy owner's like, who do I believe? What should I do?
Some of the most powerful, fulfilling relationships I've had with clients over the years were ones that near the beginning, I admitted to not knowing something or admitted to an error, that sort of thing. That is a relationship builder. I mean, you don't want to make mistakes, but we all do. And if or you don't want to be ignorant, but we all are, right? But,
well, we can't know everything, and we might think it's this. We want to react immediately, especially if you're in emergency medicine, you want to react immediately. However, sometimes listening to the client, or listening to, say, the general vet who stabilized them to get them to the emergency vet, would be really helpful, because they should be there, eyes and ears, for the first 2 or 3 hours of the dog's issue. I mean, in bloat, Irish setters, we bloat all the time. So we know to get them stabilized and then bring them to the emergency clinic, because sometimes the surgery will be a success, and then the stress on the heart will be so much that they'll pass within the next 24 hours after surgery. So, stabilizing them, it seems counterintuitive, but sometimes it's what you need to do before. And, it's just interesting to listen to you and how you communicate with your clients. It reminds me of my 25-year vet who, she would always say, this is what I think it is, but I'm going to check with a colleague of mine, and let's regroup later on this afternoon. Because she always, it wasn't that I never felt she was unsure. I felt as if she wanted to be oversure. Word. It's probably not a word. Extra.
But it makes sense, yeah.
Makes sense.
The medicine is just so complex. It's sort of like infinitely complex, right? Nobody can master everything. But what you can master is an approach to it, right? An approach to the complexity. That's what you can master. No.
Absolutely. So before we go, Philip, I have to ask you who the red bird is behind you.
Oh, that's actually a dragon.
It's a dragon.
It's a kite. Fly anymore because the tail is totally shredded, but I didn't want to throw it out, and
hard to throw it out.
Behind me, the walls are all covered with stuff, so that's okay. That's a closet door.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. You know what, everyone? I hope you've enjoyed Philip and I and our banter, but please, please, please pick up the book, Heal the Beast, a jaunt through Curious History of the Veterinary Arts, because you will not believe what Philip was able to uncover and share with you that will make veterinary medicine seem a whole lot different once you're finished the book. And I can't wait to see your other books that are kind of come out now that you're going to retire, Philip. And I hope you'll come on when you get those books out there so we can join you in celebrating.
Love to. Thank you very much.
Oh, God. Thanks so much, Philip. And everyone, kiss your babies for me, whether it's a dog, a cat, a horse, a fish, a lizard, a snake. I love them all. Until we meet again, take care.